Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name's Dr. Melody Smith and I'm a clinical psychologist. On this channel I make videos for aspiring clinical psychologists on their journey to becoming clinical psychologists. In today's video I'll be sharing tips for when preparing for your clinical psychology doctorate interviews. If you have made it this far and you have been offered an interview, I just want to take this opportunity right now to say well done. That's amazing. What you have done is you have clearly demonstrated that you meet the minimum criteria to train as a clinical psychologist, and by giving you an interview, what the clinical psychology courses are telling you is that they want to know more about you and that you have a shot at getting your place on training. Because there's so much that can come of the interview, naturally going into the interview it can be really nerve-wracking and there can be a lot of pressure on performing in the interview, and so it can just be a very, very difficult and stressful time for aspiring clinical psychologists. This video is for anybody who is preparing for the clinical psychology doctorate interviews and would like to know what I did when I was preparing for the clinical psychology doctorate interviews, and most importantly what I learned from doing the first interview, which went really, really badly, to a couple of years later my second interview where I got a place. So here we go. Be real about your feelings. I don't know about you, but the very thought of interviewing is enough to make me feel nervous. When I'm nervous, I know that I struggle to think and put my words together. I have a really fast racing heart. I feel a bit sweaty, hot, and it's just altogether a really uncomfortable experience, and it's very difficult to perform in that experience. But on top of that, I'm more aware of what's going on around me, and it makes me feel like everybody knows that I'm feeling nervous, and that just throws me off even more. So for me, it's about being real with myself and knowing that in an interview situation, I am probably going to feel nervous. Our bodies and our brains are wired to respond to our environment, and to us, we're interpreting this interview as being something like a major feat, and naturally our bodies will release hormones to prepare us for this massive feat. Now it actually triggers a fight or flight response in us, or a freeze, which is not particularly helpful because it's more of a physical response. So it's pumping hormones into our bodies that makes us able to respond to whatever threats or feats that are happening around us. It's not so helpful when there's an intellectual feat. And the reason for that is because, our bodies are wired up and they're geared and ready to move, but those hormones actually switch off our prefrontal cortex, which helps us with planning, switching tasks, sustaining attention, all the skills that we need to be able to understand what questions were being asked in the interview and to answer them. So feeling really nervous will knock out the prefrontal cortex and mean that we're not able to think in all of those complex and creative, wonderful ways. And so as much as possible, we want to reduce that disturbance to the prefrontal cortex. We want to be able to access the things that are in our brains so that we can just perform and just say and demonstrate, all the wonderful things that we're able to bring to the role. It's important that those stress hormones are kept to a minimum, but to an extent we have to accept that they're gonna be there. There's nothing really that we can do about that. Now we know that there's no point in trying anything different, is there, right? Wrong. There are things that we can be doing now to help us to minimize the effects of those stress hormones. First thing I would say that helped me is engaging in positive self-talk. So saying to myself things like, it's only nerves, they will pass, it will be okay, I've got this. Saying those things in my mind were just very reassuring and just stopped my mind from going on to negative thoughts that might make the anxiety worse and maintain that kind of vicious cycle of worry and anxiety, making me feel worse and less able to perform, which is what happened in my first interview. And actually, I mentioned in my last video about kind of just blanking out, and what probably happened to me is that I got too overwhelmed with anxiety and stress hormones, and instead of fighting or flighting, I actually froze, and that's not what we want. So practice positive self-talk. Start practicing that positive self-talk from now. For me, using positive self-talk is really helpful, but the other thing that's really helpful is deep breathing, because deep breathing, as we know, helps to regulate the heart rate, to regulate the breathing, and those two things are implicated when we are feeling nervous. And so if we're able to regulate our heart rate, regulate our breathing a bit better, it helps to just generally regulate the body and help to bring down those anxiety levels, so that we're able to think and access the prefrontal cortex and answer questions and even ask some wonderful questions too. I hope these tips for interview have been helpful. I welcome any comments below. I've been Dr. Melody Smith. See you next time.